I'm going to shift gears a little bit. There, in one of the emails, you mentioned that you are writing a book.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about your book. Is it your story, or is it the story of how you create, or is it the story of Ulu, or how? What's the book about?
Yeah. Well, it's not an autobiography, but it is I would say, a revelation of Mu culture. Because
Okay.
when we investigate, if you go to Google and say Mu culture Lemuria, what is missing from a lot of people's account is there's no one that's transferring and translating it from a genealogical account.
Okay.
So I'm that person who's going to finally share what Mu Lemuria is by way of an actual genetic line. And so that's going to be my first book. Of course, there's so much medicine that I work with, such as Ulu and such as Pua Ihu Ihu Fern medicine. And of course, they deserve their books as well. And so, those are all things that I am joyously and happily available to produce a book of those as well. But this
Right.
initial one will just be in general of Mu culture.
Because we don't know about it. Was there not a written language? Did people just, or was it just, you say kapu, it was just forbidden to write that?
It's so old, Abby, that who knows what happened at certain intervals and junctions that disrupted its transference.
Hmm.
It's so old. And so luckily, I have access to a lot of those doctrines. And just so people know, because what you just shared too, Abby, it's true. Mu was not a written language, like Hawaiian is actually not a written language. It is now because we've had to adapt our
Hmm.
language to the Western world,
Hmm.
but it wasn't a written language. And so what we did as Mu is everything's actually stored in our spinal cord.
Yes.
Everything, all
Tell
the
me
data,
more.
information.
I can't explain it the way you can. Tell me that. Tell me more.
Yeah, well, we have 33 vertebrae and there's 33 codes within the vertebrae, and it's an archive. It's an archive. These vertebrae are all archivists.
Hmm.
And the skill of the people of Mu, and this is not just Mu, this is many cultures in the world, we know how to archive within our spinal cord. It's the
Hmm.
obelisk, it's the pillar within
Hmm.
us. And if you know how to, I would say, translate the data and the information within that spinal cord, you have access to this sacred doctrine. And
Yes.
it's not just the historical records of like your family or humanity, it's really the historical archive of like cosmic consciousness.
Yes.
And so it's pretty gigantic what all of us have access to. And so Ulu, and I believe that's the portal that you are a part of, Ab,
Yes.
thank you
Yes.
so much, is I'm beginning to introduce to people ways to which you can come into a kind of fluency of your spinal cord so
Hmm.
that you can begin to receive that disclosure.
Hmm.
And so another thing that we have in the Hawaiian culture and Mu culture is we have something called an oli helu. And an oli helu is a genealogical chant. And
Okay.
so although we didn't have like a book, we had a chant. And every Hawaiian family has a genealogical chant. Like for me, because it spans to 18,000 BC, when
Right.
we utter our genealogical chant, it can take up to 10 days
Isn't that
to
incredible?
recite, because we're bringing up names, we're bringing up locations, and we're bringing up specifics about each generation. So we know
Okay.
what was documented and what was accomplished in each generation.
Isn't that incredible? Uh, that's incredible. That's mind blowing. It's really mind blowing. Um, but you're also breaking with the tradition by sharing it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that because I'm curious. I'm just a curious person. I my my daughter and I went to go visit the Baha'i temple because we were just curious about it.
Yeah.
We wanted to learn more. What is it? And I'm always wanting to know more because, I may be one religion or another, but I feel like every religion has the same goal, and that's peace and love. So, for us to be able to understand more about Mu, it's the value goes on and on and on. I can't thank you enough. It's so interesting, and I want to be able to be that open all the time.
Yeah.
It's and what will come to me because I so in new culture, do you believe in an afterlife? Because your tutu did come to you with her arms open.
Yeah.
Do you believe in an afterlife?
Well, I'll put it like this. My grandmother and my kupuna and the elders, they will come to me because they've never not been me. And so it's an aspect of me that is simply
Okay.
presenting itself. And
Okay.
so, that idea of separation is another thing within my culture that it's sort of a modern thing, this idea of separation. And what I will share, and I want to remind you and the audience again, is that when we can tap into new culture and revitalize that culture, we're also tapping into the very codes of what it means to be non-possessive.
Yes.
Now, when I say possessive, I'm not saying we can't live in beautiful homes, right? And have beautiful
Right.
things. I love those things, but we don't have a sense of attachment to them.
Right.
This includes our relationship to other people. And
Yes.
so, when I engage with my kupuna who have never not been a part of me, I don't have that sense of this separation, because it's that sense of separation that perhaps motivates me to become attached, because then I'm now influenced by this culture of possession. And I really feel like that's one of the things that I'm inspired about releasing the Ike, the knowledge of Mu, is to once again uh, begin the conversation with humanity about, if there is something that is taking humanity to war and war culture, it's likely
Yes.
possession. And so if
Yes.
we can reconcile this fascination and addiction to possession, we will reconcile war and war culture.
God willing. I mean, we are living in very interesting times. I don't want to get political that way, but if you could resolve every, conflict around the world, please, please, I'm all for it. I had a question. You mentioned, I'm going to shift again because I do have so many questions and I know I'm not going in a straight line, but you're so interesting. I
Yeah.
just have all these little questions that popped up. So I heard you talking about the significance of gold and you wearing a gold ring, and I was wearing gold for you. So what is the significance of gold?
Yeah, gold is a superconductor. And so let's remember that you and I were electrical beings. That's basically what we are. There's a scaffolding of us that is organic, and then there's something that constitutes the energy of us, and that's electricity.
Mhm.
And so we're electrical beings. Gold as a superconductor is one of the greatest ways for us to neutralize the activity of our energetic field.
Why
And
would you want to neutralize?
otherwise, you're in hysterics.
Okay.
We're in mania, because there's so much data and information that many of us are even sometimes being colonized with, right?
Okay.
We're putting on identities that is actually not ours, and likely because we don't have this neutral energy within our own electrical force field. And so it creates a lot of, I would say, clogging and contaminants, which then creates us susceptible to become manipulated. And
Okay.
so something like gold, and of course, gold as that mineral, but also there's monatomic gold, which is like a gold that's soluble in water, so it can be ingested, something like that. It really supports us in neutralizing that electrical field, so we don't live in such, here's a word I want to say, submission.
Submission to a Western culture
To
where
anything, to
submission to
whatever,
anything.
to being overpowered by exterior forces, because we are so disorganized.
Hmm.
And part of like my journey into addiction was like, I was so disorganized that I was also simultaneously so submissive, because I didn't
Right.
even know how to conduct myself.
What was your profession when all of this happened?
I was a kindergarten teacher.
You were a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
You were a oh my gosh, that's incredible because that I would think, yeah, it's chaotic because kids are chaotic, but it's also such a wholesome job. It's a wholesome profession. It's just wow. That's the balance. You were just two separate worlds you were living in.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I
And
guess you were always a teacher because I feel like you have a lot to teach us.
yeah, I feel it's natural for me. But you know what I want to say about the teaching in the American system, Abby, is that I became disenchanted with teaching because of I learned quickly that in the American system, it's all about mandating children how to obey.
Right.
And that's
Get
what
in
I
line.
think. It's like this is you tell the children how they have to behave and what their identity needs to be. And what I loved about working with 5 year olds is one, they're so honest.
Yes.
Love love it. So honest. And they're so available to be curious.
Mhm.
And what happens is when they go into the system is they begin to be mandated on who they have to be, and it turns
Okay.
into a process of obedience. And that was also one of the things that I felt so disenchanted with. It's like, wow, this thing that I was like so excited to be a part of, like it feels a little nefarious. It does.
Okay.
And so, it kind of aided in that. But luckily, right, we don't all work for public or private schools, right?
Right.
There's different ways that
That you
many
can
of us
teach.
can foster the children.
Did you go to a traditional, you know, Western education system? Did you go to, kindergarten through 12th grade the same and then college?
Yeah, yeah. I was, public schools throughout my childhood. I actually went to a college in Minnesota.
In Minnesota. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
yeah.
What school in Minnesota? I'm just curious.
The University of Minnesota, Twin
Oh,
Cities.
you're a gopher.
Yeah.
How about that? Wow, that must have just knocked you out going from, well, you had a entry via LA every summer, but
Well,
going from Hawaii to Minnesota, that's a big change.
it was exotic. It
It
was
was
exotic.
exotic.
Yeah, that's right. It's fun.
Oh,
It's exotic.
oh, how terrific. And you studied education at the University of Minnesota.
I studied history, and I did do some grad work in UC Berkeley,
Wow.
specifically for museumology. And so that was kind of like my curiosity. I
Oh,
wanted
that's wonderful.
the museum system, but I ended up getting an offer to teach at a prestigious private school here in Hawaii
Hmm.
that is specific for Hawaiian students. And so I'm like, oh, that feels so good.
Right.
And so that's the journey with teaching the children began there. But many of us, I feel, we have to go through these varying initiations in our life to really feel the triumph of
Hmm.
landing in our kiakahi. Like we have to feel the
In your
contrast and the
purpose.
variation. And because one of the things that I remember about when I was 5 years old, I was gifted back to my parents who lived a very Western life. And so I went from ceremony to all of a sudden being in this world where it's like, oh, you better perform, you better obey. And I'm
Hmm.
like, wow, what happened? Like, why was I abandoned by my grandmother and then sent to live this almost like very abusive life?
Did it feel abusive?
Well, yes, like being a child and being told how you have to behave.
Yes.
That's abusive. And that's why when I worked as a teacher, that, almost triggered those memories. It's like, oh, this is a system that is just persevered. Like, I cannot be a part of this system.
Right.
But
It works for the adults who run it.
sure, sure, it works for agendas. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So, I realized though, as an adult, right, now that I'm living my kiakahi, I'm like, of course, my grandmother had to release me.
Oh.
She had to release me. I had to have a proper initiation.
You had to see what the other was.
Had to. And also, if I were to live in ceremony my whole life, how in the world was I going to relate to other people?
Yeah. Well, because we all live in authority. um,
Yeah.
I feel like your heart and soul are just so open. You're, I just, I, I want to know something that I can use to reach this like openness.
Hmm. Yeah. I would say it begins with what I call like the Grand Inquisition. And the Inquisition is beginning to ask yourself, what makes me happy?
What makes me happy?
What makes me happy?
Yeah.
And just observe yourself and your life and notice the moments where you are just naturally happy.
Yes.
And I really got to emphasize that naturally happy because many of us are performative happy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I got to do this. As long as I do this, I'm going to be happy. And then, like, we force ourselves to experience that as happiness when it's actually,
Right. Like check it off the list.
yeah, or like, wow, I'm supposed to be enjoying this, but somehow it's burdensome. And so, what makes you naturally happy? For me, uh, here's an example. I asked someone, a dear friend of mine, Barrett. I said, Barrett, what for you is the definition of a leader, a true leader?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, a true leader is someone who, in a crowded room, breathes the deepest. And that got me thinking because I said, you know what, Barrett, aside from leadership, which I agree with you, when I was breathing the deepest, that's when I was also the most naturally happy.
Yes.
And so perhaps throughout your day, just notice, when does your breathing just begin to neutralize? When you feel that, observe, be like, what's happening right now?
What
What
am
is
I
actually
doing?
happening? You've just located your happiness. Now, the key is to transfer that as something that's applicable to your life all the time.
Yes.
How can you invite that as something that's applicable all the time? Then you begin to just function and behave as such because that becomes the most important thing for you. The most
And
important.
everything will come. At, but you're giving away all of this information. I've never been solicited with an invoice for joining your sessions, and you sell these products and they're so beautiful. But I mean, is that enough? Is that enough to sustain you and the team of people, or is it just you who create?
Well, I have people, I have wonderful people who assist me. Um, but for the most part, yeah, this is a labor of love that I just keep finding myself in enjoyment. And I always tell myself, Abby, I'm like, okay, if it gets to the point where I'm going into that burden, like, of course, I'm going to have to expand and bring on more people. But I haven't reached that point yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. And I'm so well taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And I here's my definition of happiness now.
Okay, I like this.
Yeah, because before, right, I'd be like, happiness means like this and that and big lights and bright lights and
Big,
fireworks, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I've realized that happiness is contentment.
Mm,
And I'm
yes.
content. And my alma core, my higher self says, Keoni, congratulations, because all you need to do now is just
Mm-hmm.
maintain the contentment. And so that's just what I'm doing over here.
Well, you're doing it very well. I just have quick questions. What is your age?
I am 43. Yeah.
How lucky you are. And I wish you 143 more. Um, do That's not a question. Um, what person, alive or otherwise, would you want to share a meal with?
Wow. Gosh, Abby, this is so cool because I was just thinking about this the other day. And like, I was like, honestly, very curious about this Egyptian pharaoh
Mm-hmm.
uh, called Akhenaten.
Akhenaten.
And I'm just saying that now because this is literally what I was thinking yesterday. I'm like, wow, it'd be so fun to have a conversation with Akhenaten.
Yes. What would you say?
I would say, oh gosh, I would ask Akhenaten what his idea of possession is.
That's interesting because if he was a pharaoh, he would have been buried in a pyramid with all of his possessions.
Yeah. So it'd be very interesting to see like what motivated that civilization to be so entrenched in possession.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed. What else do I want to know about you? Oh, tell me about your tattoos.
Okay, I'll tell you about these. These tattoos I have on my hand because this is traditionally a tattoo that only women get.
Oh,
And the reason why I have it is because my grandmother and great grandmother and great great grandmother had this tattoo. And so it's an
very good.
honoring of my female line or my mitochondrial line. And so these
Mm-hmm.
symbols right here, this is the hala blossom. So it's Earth
Okay.
Mother. Earth Mother. These
Earth
are the
Mother.
moon phases. And then
Moon
this,
phases. Oh,
yeah,
very good.
this is the Eva bird. So this
Yeah.
is Sky Father. And so it's the moon phases with Earth Mother, Sky Father.
Oh, very good.